Organizers or panelists on the line. When you are ready to begin the presentation, press the Start Broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Sorry for the late start. My name is Sarah Shasia. I'm a project coordinator at OCASI, the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, and I'm your facilitator today. I would just like to review a few technical guidelines with you so that to ensure that we make the most out of your participation in today's webinar. So you should see something like this on your screen. This is your GoToWebinar control panel. I'm showing you this because everyone, as you probably noticed, is muted at the beginning of this webinar. And you will be unmuted if you want to ask a question during the question and answer period towards the end of this webinar. Or you can also type your questions to me and I will read it out loud to the speakers. So here you can type a question for the presenter, and here you can raise your hand to be unmuted by myself. So we want to encourage this active participation, but we'd also like to ensure that your questions and comments are on topic and are relevant to all listeners if possible. And I'd like to thank you for that in advance. Also, please note that we're recording today's webinar and we'll be posting it online for those who couldn't make today's webinar. A copy of the presentation slides will also be posted there. And the link will be shared with you in a follow-up email. Just as a background, excuse me, this webinar is part of OCASI's Refugee Settlement Support Projects Sharing Best Practices to Build Bridges webinar series, which really aims to clarify roles and responsibilities, increase transparency, and strengthen collaboration between refugee sponsors and service providers. And the idea for this and these topics in the series came from focus groups and roundtable discussions that we've held over the past year with many of those of you who are online today. So today's webinar is the second last one in this series, and an especially exciting one because we're focusing on sharing practices that have to do with collaboration across sectors. So today, as well as on March 9th, we are having this focus on this conversation. And today we have Jacqueline Dara from the Canadian, Paul Caroline from the Canadian Baptist of Atlantic Canada, as well as David Peterson from the YMCA of St. John in New Brunswick join us today. So what I will do is I'm passing the presentation over to Jacqueline, and welcome Jacqueline, Peter, and Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let me just see here if I can share my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Okay.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for inviting us to be a part of this today, and hope that it's helpful to people. So I'll start by saying I'm Jacqueline Dara, and I work with the Canadian Baptist of Atlantic Canada. Our office is in St. John, New Brunswick. And we have been a sponsorship agreement holder for about 20 years and certainly have seen the most activity in the last few years. In the fall of 2015, our organization heard that the government's response to the Syrian crisis was to bring 25,000 people in a very short period of time. And so we coordinated a conference call with all of the local settlement service providers and offered them an invitation for us to assist them however was appropriate and helpful in their context. And we would represent about 450 Baptist churches in Atlantic Canada. And we encouraged our urban churches to serve as welcome teams to volunteer with the settlement agencies, to volunteer with them settling GARs. And we encouraged our rural churches to enter into sponsorship of BVOR cases. We had a number of agencies participate in that call, and the level of opportunity that we had to assist them varied from one organization to another. And I'm just going to let David speak to how their agency partnered with us in that time.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and welcome everybody. When we realized late fall 2015 what was coming at us, we were fully aware that we could not do this by ourselves, and so we started to strategize how we could involve the community and involve volunteers to come alongside of us and to share some of that load in a personal way. I might say back 5-6 years ago, our service providing organization was rather inward looking and was not well known in the community at all. It was, in fact, most people would not know it existed. So the director at that time made a conscious decision to say, hey, we can't do this by ourselves. We need to do a better job of being connected to the structures within our community. And I think that strategy a few years ago helped us prepare for 2015. And so when Jacqueline and Paul came along and said, how can we help? And we started to build this relationship, and with communication, connecting our networks, it became an opportunity to call out to the community and say, this is what's going on, would you like to help? And we together organized some training teams. I reorganized my activity checklist that I always use when we do reception for government-assisted refugees. And I made it a little simpler and practical for what we called their welcome teams. We decided that the welcome teams needed to be consisting of around 5 people, 6 people, and that would enable it so that nobody was carrying any too heavy a load. And we wanted to make sure people that could be available, some during the daytime, some in the evening, according to their work schedules. And really, it's kind of a blur in my mind, but people responded to Jacqueline and Paul's call to their network, and other people in the community through our Facebook at the YMCA here in St. John also responded, and we started to hold training sessions to enable people to understand what was happening, the background of what we did, and how they could participate with that in a very practical way. Here in our city, it was just an amazing response, and we ended up with approximately, well over 700 volunteers actually. And that was a massive undertaking to organize that, but our staff here really rose to the occasion. We did extra training sessions, many evenings through the week before Christmas time to prepare people. And that just turned out to be a great advantage for us. And Jacqueline, do you want me to say anything more specific about that right now?
No, I think that's good. And so that was how we partnered together to work with GARs. But then, of course, there were some very high needs GARs that came. You want to talk about those?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, previous to the Syrian effort, we had received a family with a very high need. It was a very stressful, emotional time for this family, and for us, the needs were just higher than what we had the capacity to meet here, both within our SPO and within the community. We were not really aware of the potential of the JAZ program. And so at that time, I think we connected with you, Jacqueline, and one of your churches came alongside of us and took on this role. We learned about it, we studied it together, and said, okay, this is how it could work. And actually that church group picked up the ball and did such a fantastic job. It saved us as a service providing organization because we could not have helped this family to the extent that they needed. And it also saved the family. They're still here in the city. They're doing very well and very healthy. And we're so grateful for the jazz program. So then when the Syrian effort happened and we started to see several families coming in with higher needs, we already had a taste of what it could be. And so the welcome teams from some of the churches intentionally took on that challenge with big hearts, and they provided services from their own personal networks that just broadened and strengthened what we could do in our community here. So we found that the joint assisted sponsorship a very helpful tool, and those relationships are still ongoing. Those groups are still helping our families who came with those needs, and those will be lifelong relationships.
Yeah, and that particular church that you're talking about that took on that first case, they have since done additional jazz cases in partnership with you, and they have also brought relatives of one of the jazz families that they're working with. So we also have had the opportunity to have some BVOR families come. Once they arrived in Canada, we discovered that some of their medical needs were much higher than ever could have been anticipated. And so we've had some cases that were converted to in Canada jazz cases. And then we've been able to partner with different SPOs, depending where the family is located. And every one of those opportunities for us to work with these high needs families has been very positive, because the relationship and the partnership with the SPO has been very positive. As the Syrian crisis unfolded and Canada's response to it, one of the gentlemen in our organization, he and his wife, opened up their garage and started receiving furniture that we had no immediate need for, but it was good furniture and would serve a family very well. So they started storing furniture in their garage. As families arrived, both the folks at the YMCA and others doing sponsorship through local churches knew that he had some furniture in his garage that was available for people to have at no cost. In some cases, it was delivered to families. In other cases, they would come out and pick it up from his home. And after just a couple of years of doing that, he quickly outgrew his garage. It was just amazing to see how this unfolded. One of our local churches just really had a heart for that and decided that was something that they felt that they could contribute to the overall response that was happening here in St. John. And so they took the whole basement of their church building and have converted it into a furniture bank. Every Saturday morning, they've had furniture dropped off there for the last 2 or 3 years. And they have helped hundreds of families settle or resettle into St. John. And that's just been an amazing thing. So the partnership in that is that the YMCA certainly knows that that is there. They would be directing all of their GAR families to come, and it's just free. You just make an appointment to come, they come, and whatever they can load in the truck is free for them to have. They can come back as often as they need new furniture. And they continue to receive and distribute furniture on a very regular and ongoing basis. So that's been quite a neat partnership now between a constituent group and a SAW and a SPO. And so that's kind of neat and unique as well. David, do you want to talk about some training?
Sure, I can do that. Your voice is cutting out on my headphone once in a while, so I'm not always sure when you're passing the baton to me.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, that's okay. We'll just keep going here. Well, I think the relationship that we've developed with you, Jacqueline and Paul, has aided both of us. We have seen needs of families and individuals here in our community, and we just maintain an open line of communication between ourselves and you, and that has helped us to move forward with making connections for the different kinds of programs that are available, helps that are needed. And so doing some community awareness for private sponsorship, blended visa office referred program and whatnot, that's been a unique relationship for us to collaborate and do those things together. And again, joining our networks has just made a broader base of awareness in the community so that more people are finding out what they can do, how they do it, when they become aware. So we're grateful for that collaboration that we have.
And back in the fall of 2015, you guys were having training sessions multiple times a week. And it was kind of neat because you were doing simultaneous training. So people who were volunteering with you to work with some of your GAR families were sitting in on the training session, but also there would have been families, there would have been sponsors in the community who were anticipating a BVOR family arriving, and they were also sitting in on the same training. We were all learning together and growing together, adapting to changes that we needed to make, both in our training and in our understanding of our current reality. Yeah, and that was just a real strong win, I think, for all of us in that time. As a result of the sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, I have a fairly extensive checklist of all the things that need to be done during the early wrap period, and to be able to modify that and simplify it for volunteers and community groups and help them to understand, okay, don't forget to do this, don't forget to do that, and you need to cover all these bases. I think it gave a lot of people a peace of mind that this was not an insurmountable thing, that they could do this. So I think those workshops that we did together were very beneficial.
And of course, over time, your SPO had to increase your staff, some maybe longer term, some shorter term contracts, while not moving the space that you call your office space. And so you quickly have outgrown the space you're in, and are remaining to stay where you are. And so it's been our privilege to be able to partner with you. And this is really something a little bit more recent for us, to be able to offer our SPO space in our building where they can come and have quiet meeting space, where they can come and do training for their staff. We're now approaching some churches in the area where our SPO's office is to ask if they'd also have space that could be made available through the week times when their church spaces may not be as busy, that you could have a quiet space where you could use, where you could do training or whatever other needs you may have. And so that's just one more way that we think we can partner together and benefit from what each other has to share and offer to the other.
That's right. We're actually on a desk sharing schedule right now because we have so many staff. We're actually in a brand new facility, only 2.5 years old. But in order to accommodate the growth that we've had here in St. John, we've had to exercise a little cooperation at a whole new level. So we're grateful for the space that you've opened up for us. It's really hard to get a meeting room in our facility now because the YMCA, as well as Newcomer Connections, is sharing the space. So we're thankful. Thank you.
One of the other neat things that's come out of this is because we had so many people from our community that were involved with welcoming GAR families. These GAR families quickly grew attached to the welcome teams that worked with them. And those welcome teams now will do anything that they can do to help those families be reunited with their loved ones who are still living as refugees somewhere outside of Canada. And so it's been a really neat thing for us to be able to go into the YMCA, meet with some of these GAR families, help them understand the cost and the practical implications of what's involved with doing a private sponsorship, a full private sponsorship. And then as time progresses, some of them have found a group of 5 or a church that's willing to come alongside of them and help facilitate those sponsorships. And so our SAW has been able to process some of those applications. So like most other SAWs, we have a waiting list. And so those families certainly can go onto our waiting list. And when space becomes available, we're happy to help facilitate that. And so I just think that's another great opportunity that we've had to partner both with the SPO and with the community.
That's right. And because of what you're able to do, it's increased the awareness and really the excitement in our community of what can be done, and more people are trying to be involved. I would say that we have more people trying to make an effort with these programs than there is actual space to do that within the caps that are provided.
Mm-hmm. For sure. The YMCA also has provided interpretation services.
Yeah, we've been really fortunate in our community over the last few years to retain lots of people with lots of language ability. So we've been able to, through different programs, hire extra staff. And I don't have it in my head right now how many different languages we're covering, but it would be in the neighborhood of a dozen different languages. And so we are happy to share that with private sponsor groups when they have a particular need, and to give them assistance with the connections and the staff that we have here.
Yeah, and I would say as a SAW in the same city, back in the early days when the first Syrians were starting to arrive in our area, there were very few people here who spoke Arabic. And so finding translators was a huge challenge for us. And so it was such a gift to know that we could go to the Y, who already had some people who had been vetted and screened and been referred or recommended as good interpreters that people could use. Now there's lots of interpretation available because there's so many people here, but in the early days that was huge for us. And even now when we meet with these GAR families, it's just easier and more comfortable for them for us to be able to have our meetings in their language as they're continuing to learn English. And so we appreciate that when we go over to the Y and meet with a GAR family, often the Y provides an interpreter in those sessions as well to help facilitate that, just for clarity and ease for the GAR families that we're meeting with.
That's right.
And one of the things that we're thankful for but wish didn't have to happen, we've had more than one instance in the last number of years where there has been some tension maybe between a sponsoring group and a newcomer family. And we're thankful that in every one of those instances that we've been involved with, the newcomer family has felt comfortable enough with the SPO to be able to go to them and voice their concerns with whatever the reality is, or their interpretation of the reality is with what was going on. The SPO then would have contacted us and help facilitate a meeting. So we would travel to wherever that SPO is, use their meeting room and usually an interpreter to meet with the family and hear again what their challenges are or their concerns are, and get a better understanding of what it is that they're struggling with. From there, often we would meet with the sponsoring group and kind of raise that at an appropriate level, that these concerns had been raised to us, trying to understand how things got to where they were from their side. And then often meeting back with the newcomer family to help try to work towards some kind of peaceful resolution. And we actually think that that's something that the SPO has done that's above and beyond what they would be required to do, because you may know that a privately sponsored family is not entitled to a settlement counselor. And so those calls probably should have gone to the sponsor or to us. But we appreciate that the SPOs have that level of good working relationship between the SAWs and the SPOs, that we're all working together to help newcomers settle well in our communities. So, and just really appreciating the opportunities that we have to work together, even when the situations aren't always positive.
And that's our privilege to do that. One of our overarching goals here at Newcomer Connections and the YMCA St. John is building healthy communities. So touching people's lives and helping them work through issues is something that would be important to us, and that the that people are feeling safe, connected, secure, all those things. So we're happy to be a part of that.
Mm. And we would feel quite strongly that that our SAW could not have done this without a good collaborating relationship with the SPOs that we work with here in Atlantic Canada. I think we have a great group of people. We have a good working relationship with the local IRCC offices, and just feel like all of this has been made possible because teams have worked collaboratively together, all for the good of the newcomers who have arrived. And so it's been our privilege to be able to be a part of this, and very thankful for SPOs like the YMCA and all that they've done to help make that easier and smoother for us and the families that we serve. So that is the end of our presentation. I don't know if there's any questions.
Thank you, all three of you, especially Jacqueline and Paul and David, for all of this really interesting information. It's always great to hear how people are approaching partnership and collaboration work. So thank you for sharing your experience and making the time for this. We now have still about 25 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes for questions and answers. So as I mentioned before, attendees, you can participate by clicking the hand icon that allows me to unmute you individually. You can ask your questions directly, or feel free to type your question up and I will read it out loud for everyone. And we do have one question already, and that's for you, Jacqueline. You had mentioned towards the end of your presentation, says here that PSRs are not entitled to settlement counselor. And the question is, if you could clarify, do you mean a RAP, resettlement assistance program counselor, or are people in New Brunswick not entitled to settlement counselor support?
Oh, sure. So for a privately sponsored family that comes to Canada, for the first 12 months that they are in Canada, while they are under the settlement care of their sponsors, they are not entitled to a settlement counselor at a SPO. After they complete their 12 months of sponsorship, I believe a settlement counselor can be made available to them. But for the first 12 months, their sponsor would act as their settlement counselor.
Okay, that's interesting because as someone speaking from Ontario, they, as a permanent resident, the newcomers would be able to make use of any federally funded settlement programs for permanent residents, even if it's a settlement worker. So I'm not sure if that's different in different provinces. Perhaps something for us to look into, and if the information is different from what you're saying, Jacqueline, I'll send it out to everyone if that's okay.
And David could probably speak to that as well.
I wish I had one of my settlement counselors here with me just to verify the exact details of that. I think it would partially depend on our capability, our caseload at that time. Our counselors are really on overload, and I would think that the private sponsoring group is responsible for all of that care during the first 12 months, as Jacqueline said. Now, once that time commitment is over, then they, as a permanent resident, the client or the newcomer could certainly contact us for assistance, for guidance. So it might just depend on the local SPO and what their caseload is at that time.
Right.
And even during that 12-month period, they would be entitled to all of the other services that are offered. So language classes, any training sessions, any of those kinds of things that were being offered, those are open to all permanent residents.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah, I just want to draw a distinction between the resettlement assistance program settlement workers, because certainly that for sure I know across Canada, privately sponsored refugees are not entitled to their services because they're for GARs. But I think we can look into this, and if there's other information, then we'll send it out. We do have a question from Serena, and she has her hand up. So Serena, I'll just unmute you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate the fact that you guys have shared this with us. And I guess my question is more for OCASI as the organizers. Will this be kind of encouraged or presented across Canada to SPOs? Because I know that we have had some churches as a national SAW who have wanted to do this sort of thing, and when approaching the SPOs in their area, it just wasn't possible. Obviously, the timing of that was when the Syrian influx came in, and so I know caseworkers were doing all they could to handle just their workload alone, and so organizing volunteers would have been difficult for them. But how can we inspire this kind of collaboration across Canada and move it as a model for all SPOs and sponsoring groups to work together to, I'm thinking, you know, manage the GAR's supports as well?
Thank you, Serena, for the question. It's a good question, and I think we are certainly trying to support efforts to for refugee sponsorship groups and settlement service providers to collaborate closer together and to work together, because we know that also the IRCC, the federal government, is interested in that sort of collaboration. We know that sponsors have to identify local settlement service providers within the settlement plan form that they submit. So it's definitely a good practice, because we know that settlement services can provide additional supports and they can complement the work that sponsors are doing. But at this point, I'm hoping that a webinar like this and a webinar following up on the March 19th inspires people, as you have said, and we will see what follows from there. We have held some roundtables in Toronto and Ottawa, and there's one coming up in London, Ontario on March 5th. So to continue these sort of conversations and see what can be done and what are some gaps and how can they be addressed. Perhaps from your perspectives, Jacqueline or David and Paul, is there any tips or lessons that you can offer in terms of other people sort of pursuing that type of partnership that you have seen?
Yeah, take each other out for coffee and build good relationships.
Great. Thank you. And I have a written question from Robin Warren. Robin is asking, what has been the retention rate for PSRs, GARs, and BVRs? That is, has there been any immigration to other parts of Canada? So I guess this is not so much about partnership, but if you would like to speak on that, I don't know if you have the answer to that, Paul or Jacqueline. Go ahead.
Well, I think the answer would come from both of us because we have different background information. For myself, with government-assisted refugees, our retention rate is up around 85% in St. John, which is really high compared to what we would have had 5 years ago. I think a big part of that is working together in these collaborative networks within the community. Building a healthier, more secure, friendly place for newcomers. We've really worked hard at that over the last 5 years, and our retention rate was less than 50% 5 years ago. So we're really happy about the efforts that we've made in building networks and cooperating, like with Jacqueline and Paul and their SAW. So that's a very positive thing for us. And it's actually created its own mini vortex. We've had secondary migration coming into St. John, which was unheard of in the past. I don't have those numbers right in front of me right now, but we've had several families that have come here that were destined to other places. And we've also had people that have left here and realized that the grass was not greener on the other side, and they've moved back to St. John. Again, I would say like 4 or 5, maybe 6 families that have done that.
Yeah, and our experience would be very consistent with that. I don't know the percentage, but we probably would find that some of our rural families at the end of year 1 would probably tend to migrate more towards an urban center. And those families tend to stay there. But we have a lot of urban families rural families who love it there, who really find their place, settle in well, find employment, and wouldn't even entertain moving to a city center. We have had some families who have moved. Most of them seem to go to Ontario. We have 2 of them right now that are in the process of moving back, 2 families from different areas that moved in the second half of 2017, and both of them are making plans to be back in Atlantic Canada before this summer. And so there is some migration and remigration, I guess, coming both ways.
Wonderful, thank you. It's really insightful stats and experiences. Thank you for sharing that. We do have, I think I see another hand up. Halina, I see you have your hand up. Do you have a question? Oops. You have self-muted. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, so maybe I'll take another written question in the meantime. Beth is commenting, one thing that has been incredibly helpful in Toronto is having a settlement worker join the various sponsorship community Facebook groups. That way, when a question is asked to the group, we can immediately get input from a settlement worker. No official role on her part, but very helpful. This saves volunteers a lot of time in getting all the relevant information.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I've never heard of that.
So we set up a Facebook group for all of the groups that we are working with here in Atlantic Canada. And it's really a place where, in the early days, it was where people were able to share resources and tools that they had discovered. Later on, it quickly became a kind of a forum for people to ask questions and share information. Often it's the platform that we use for reminding people about RSTP and other types of training programs that are being offered in their areas, or webinars that are coming up. And that's been very helpful. And so if something comes up and nobody has an answer, I'm probably the one that would reach out to the SPO or IRCC to get an answer and post back, and then everybody's getting the information all at the same time.
Great. And Lubna is commenting, a blended VOR case, while it was sponsored by a church group, had a dispute. The sponsorship group requested a mediation service through a settlement agency. After contacting IRCC to verify if it's doable, the response was that settlement agencies cannot, but instead should refer the case to IRCC directly. So we do know, I'm aware that IRCC does offer these mediation services as well. I mean, in terms of local agencies, local IRCC offices intervening when there is a conflict or a dispute at the request of either the sponsor or the sponsorship group. But I have also heard, at least in Toronto, of settlement agencies trying to at least help both parties to have a conversation, or before it reaches a crisis situation. Have you had similar experiences in St. John?
Yeah, so we have not asked the SPO to meet with the sponsor and see it all the way through. It's just simply that in our situation that the SPO has been made aware that the family's having some tension with their sponsors and allowed them to come in and voice those concerns, and then facilitated both a space and an interpreter for us to go in and have a similar conversation, and we really pick it up from there. So they have not really mitigated or mediated any of the situations. They've really just brought issues to our attention and then allowed the space and the interpreter for us to deal with that quickly.
Right.
As a SPO, we have not had to wrestle with that at an IRCC level. Maybe one case that went, grievance that went there, but I think our local IRCC office in Fredericton would be happy to provide that kind of mediation. To date, we have not had to go to that extent, and we again, because of our concern for a healthy community, we've made ourselves available whenever possible.
Right. Thank you. You have still a few minutes for questions. I'm going to take the next one, which is whether you can share information about any particular tools that you may have been using. And I think the question is more about, the onset of your relationship. Were there any memorandums of understanding that you developed together, or was there any specific tool that you used to build the partnership?
I don't think we did.
No, it really was based out of relationship and say, I know we do this and I know you do that. Can you answer this question? Sometimes it was on the phone. Sometimes it was getting together for a little meeting. So it was just step by step getting to know each other's capacities.
Mm-hmm. So you have, even to this stage, you don't have any agreements or anything formal like that you have signed?
Nope.
No, just respect.
Great. Great. And we have a comment from Laura Hambleton. She's saying, I believe that whether or not an SBO assigns a settlement counselor to a PSR client depends on the SBO settlement counselors. Depends on whether the counselors are primarily funded via RAP, so the Resettlement Assistance Program, or not. So some SBO settlement counselors are primarily funded by RAP, and so only GARs are assigned to them. But yes, PSRs can, of course, access all programs for PRs. And if there's a specific issue, a counselor can be usually arranged, but it's not typical. It depends on the SBO's funding. Right, so this was about our previous conversation. Thank you, Laura. Any other questions? I know that on webinar it can be awkward to ask a question, but please feel free, anyone who would like to actually verbally ask the question or make a comment, to use the hand icon. I can unmute you, it's not a problem. There are no silly questions. We want to make sure if you have anything on your mind about partnership work or collaboration, this is a great time to ask or to share. Okay, so if there are no further questions, I am just going to share with you some information, some final information. If you want to access, here we go. If you would like to access the recording of today's webinar and share with your colleagues or anyone else, you can go to welcomeontario.ca. On the top, you click on updates and then sharing practices to build bridges. That's where the recordings, that's where the schedule will be, but if you click on past webinars, you will see the recording as well as the presentation slide. And the other request that I have for you is, if you have any further comments, or you want to share how in your community you've been partnering and collaborating with each other, we'd love to hear from you. So please feel free to send an email to refugeesettlement@ocasi.org. It would be great to just share experiences and practices to inspire each other. As well, we have another webinar coming up on the same topic. In that, on March 19th at 12:30 again, we have Dawn Smith from the Anglican Diocese of Ottawa, and we will have Louisa Taylor of Refugee 613, a refugee sponsorship network in Ottawa. So they will share their approach and how they have built relationships and partnerships in Ottawa. That link and how to register for it will be also on the past webinar, in the schedule on the Welcome Ontario website. When you log out of the webinar today, you will get a pop-up that will ask you to provide your feedback in a very short survey. It's just 4 questions. It's important to us to know how we're doing, whether there's something outstanding you'd like to know about, and just for you to rate this particular webinar. A follow-up email will also be sent to you automatically by the system, where we will ask you to take about 2 to 3 minutes to answer the survey. So that would be wonderful if you have the time to give us that feedback. And I can see here, actually, we have 2 more questions coming in, so I'll just quickly. I think this question is for you, Jacqueline. What is the Facebook group name that you mentioned earlier?
Oh, it's called Atlantic Baptist Refugee Sponsorship.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you very much. Thank you so much, Jacqueline and Peter and David, not Peter, David Peterson, Jacqueline and Paul Carline. Thank you so much for taking the time, everyone, to log in today and for sharing your experiences and all of the information. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you for facilitating.
You're welcome.